Good morning, ma'am.
You all are here? Okay, we'll start the class. So it's 10 o'clock, I think. Still people are getting connected, I guess. So I'll wait for another 1 minute. Okay, we'll start. So last two classes I was discussing about water. Okay, so there was a lot of disturbance in last class. So I don't know how much you people could hear. So little bit I'll refresh about the previous class and then I'll continue today's class. All of you can hear me, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So previous classes we discussed about the purification of water on large scale and some topics on small scale. So in last class we discussed in among large scale purification, the last step that was disinfection by method called chlorination. We discussed about it in detail. So I just refresh about it little bit. So disinfection is a process of destructing the microorganisms by using chemical agent. This is the final step of purification process in large scale. So through this, 100% of the water gets purified. So one of the most important ways of disinfectant is by using chlorination. So we have seen what are the criteria for to have a disinfectant agent should has. So the disinfectant agent should destroy the pathogenic organisms present within the contact period, and it shouldn't leave any products, and it should react with water, and it is readily available and available at. Okay. So somebody's mic is on. I think please unmute it. Sorry, mute it. I could hear some voice. If you see someone talking, okay. You can see who's talking. Okay. So it is available readily at very reasonable cost, and it should also create some residual activity at the end of the disinfectant process. And the most important, most common method of disinfection is by chlorination. So this chlorination is it is a supplement, but not the substitute. It could able to kill the pathogenic bacteria and also oxidizes the organic matter. So we have seen the chlorine action. Chlorine action is nothing but when the during chlorination, the chlorine gets reacts with water and forms HCl and hypochlorous acid, and this hypochlorous acid ionizes and forms the hypochlorite ion. This is most important for effective ion for the chlorination process. And also this chlorine reacts with any ammonia, that is organic matter that is present in the water, and it forms the chloramines. This is the actual action principle of chlorination. So next, the principles of chlorination. So just adding adding chlorine to the water is not chlorination. It should obey certain principles. Those are like the water should be clear and free from turbidity, and the chlorine demand of the water can able to estimate. It means the amount of chlorine that is required completely to purify the water. Okay. Then and then contact period. So contact period means at least the chlorine should be present in the water for at least 1 hour of contact period to kill the bacteria or viruses whatever present in the water. And also some residual property also it should has. That means after chlorination process, that means after the chlorine demand is met, some amount of recommended concentration of chlorine that should be freely available in the water, that is called free chlorine. So it is estimated, it is recommended dose is 0.5 milligram per liter for 1 hour. That is essential. That's called as residual effect. That is very important to prevent any further contamination if it happens. Okay, to deal with that. Next is the chlorine demand. As I already discussed, it is the difference between the amount of chlorine added to the water and the amount of residual chlorine at the end of 60 minutes at given temperature and pH. So at given temperature and pH is important. So it is nothing but the amount of chlorine needed to destroy the bacteria and to oxidize all the organic matter that is present in the water. So the point at which the chlorine demand is met is called as breakpoint chlorination. So after reaching the breakpoint chlorination, what happens is if you further add the chlorine, it starts. The free chlorines, that is hypochlorite ions and hypochlorous acid starts appearing in the water. That means the chlorine demand is met in the water. So next, coming to the methods of chlorination, like we discussed the chlorine gas, chloramines, and perchlorans. These are the commonly used methods for chlorination. Among that, chlorine gas is the most effective method and very available at very reasonable price. Next is the concept called superchlorination. So it is same like chlorination, but the difference is here we add excess amount of high doses of chlorine to the water, and after chlorination process we remove the excess chlorine that is remained at the end by process called as dechlorination. So this method we use for highly polluted waters. So some of the tests which are available to identify the residual chlorine that is present at the end of the chlorination process. This also we discussed, like orthotolidine test and orthotolidine arsenate test. So orthotolidine test is mainly used to detect the free chlorines and available chlorines, that free chlorines and combine. In this method, not both together. Whereas in orthotolidine arsenate test, we find out the free chlorines and combined chlorines separately. So in this process, in this test, so if the water gets yellow color immediately within 10 seconds, it means that the free chlorine is present in the water. If the yellow coloration takes place around 15 minutes, both free chlorine, that's because of free chlorine and combined chlorine. Okay, so that's about the orthotolidine test and orthotolidine arsenate test. These are used to identify the residual chlorine that is present in the water after chlorination. There are other methods for disinfecting. Examples are ozone, UV rays, and chloramines. But these we are not commonly using because these are quite expensive. So we are not using it more commonly. Next, coming to the purification of water on small scale. So here we have two types. One is household purification of water and disinfection of wells. So let's see the household purification of water. So there are so many methods which we use for purification of water at household level. One is boiling, then chemical disinfection by using chemical agents like bleaching powder, chlorine solution, chlorine tablets, iodine, potassium permanganate. Then there is another process called filtration. And then ultraviolet by using ultraviolet irradiation. Then multi-stage reverse osmosis process. So that these are the various methods we use at household level. Let's see all this in detail. So first one is boiling. So boiling is an effective way of purification of water at household level. So to get its effectiveness, the water should be boiled to rolling boil point. So that is nothing but the water should get bubbles. Okay, once it gets boiled, the water appears like it's rolling. Okay, so for at least 5 to 10 minutes. Due to this, it can able to kill all the bacteria, viruses that are present in the water. That is a simple and very economic way of purification of water at household level. So it also, apart from that, it also has another advantage of removing the temporary hardness. If any hard water is present, it also removes the temporary hardness. And the only disadvantage with boiling is it doesn't cause any residual effect. It means further it doesn't provide any safety margin if any contamination occurs after a purification. Whereas in chlorination, we have seen there is a residual effect, right? So that effect won't be there in boiling process. So next method is the chemical disinfection. So chemical disinfection, we use various types of chemicals. Here we have bleaching powder, chlorine solution, chlorine tablets, and iodine. Most commonly used chemical agent is bleaching powder because it is very easily available at very reasonable price. So we commonly use bleaching powder. So this bleaching powder is also called as chlorinated lime. So CaOCl2. So this is a white amorphous powder which has 33% of available chlorine in it. But it is very unstable compound. So remember that it is very unstable compound. If it gets exposed to normal sunlight and temperature, it loses its chlorine property. Okay, that's why it is always recommended to store it in a dark and cool and dry place. Okay, so that's about bleaching powder. Next is chlorine solution. So chlorine solution that we have to prepare it by mixing 4 kgs of bleaching powder with 20 liters of water, then you get 5% chlorine solution. And then we have chlorine tablets, then iodine. So these are all the various chemical agents which we use for disinfection. So next is another process called filtration. As all of you might have seen in childhood days, people in so many households, people are using, were using filters. Okay. So these are the various filters you can see in the picture. The principal element here is the candle. Okay, so each filter has some candles in it. Through these candles, the water gets purified. Okay, so mainly it removes the bacteria, but it doesn't have much effect on viruses. Through filtration, we can able to remove the bacteria, but it doesn't effectively remove the viruses. Okay, so here you can see different types of filters which are available. Each filter, so if you see here the names, Berkefeld filter, Chamberlain filter, and Catherine filter. So in each filter, the whatever material we use for preparation of candle, that is different. So in Berkefeld filter, we see we use Kieselguhr for making the candle. Whereas in Chamberlain filter, it is porcelain. Whereas in Catherine filter, it is silver impregnated candle. So that's the only difference between various filters. The material what we use to prepare the candle. Okay. The only disadvantage here is we have to keep on cleaning the candles at least weekly once, because all this bacteria that gets clogged in the candles, and it reduces the effectivity of the filtration process. So that's why every week we have to remove the filter and clean it by scrubbing. So you have to scrub the candle and then what you call boil it in hot water, and then you can use it. So this is about the filtration process. So next method is ultraviolet irradiation. So it is very effective method for killing most of the microorganisms like bacteria, even viruses, and parasites and all. It involves what exactly happens in ultraviolet irradiation is by exposing the film of water to quartz mercury vapor arc lamps that emits the ultraviolet radiation. So a film of water that has to be gets exposed to quartz mercury vapor arc lamp that emits the ultraviolet radiation. So before that, for that process, the water should be free from turbidity. The advantages with this ultraviolet irradiation is it doesn't alter any taste and it doesn't produce any odor and it is not harmful on overexposure. But the disadvantages are it is expensive. So we are not commonly using this method. So next method is multi-stage reverse osmosis. So I think everybody know about this multi-stage reverse osmosis process. Most of the households are using this for the purification process. Okay, it's nothing but RO, Kent and all these things. So what exactly happens in this, we'll see. So what is meant by, before that, you should know what is meant by osmosis. So osmosis is nothing but when two solutions are separated by a semi-permeable membrane, the solvent naturally passes from the higher concentration to lower concentration, right? So that I think everybody knows it. Whereas what exactly happens in reverse osmosis is it happens in reverse process under some pressure, okay, by using some high pressures. So exactly reverse mechanism will happen with reverse osmosis. Okay, that means the solvent will pass from low concentration to high concentration in the presence of high pressure. So that is what exactly the principle of reverse osmosis. So through this process, the water we can make it as chemically and microbiologically potable. So that is the process that takes place in reverse osmosis. Basically, in reverse osmosis, there are two cartridges. So when you see the Kent, when you open the Kent or any reverse RO system, it has two cartridges inside that. So one is called as clarity cartridge, and another one is called as reverse osmosis cartridge. So in clarity cartridge, that is mainly helps to remove the suspended particles that is present in the water. Examples like dust, mud, and sand. Whereas in reverse osmosis cartridge, that is used to remove the TDS, that is total dissolved solids. This total dissolved solids are very important thing, because if the water has TDS of more than 600, okay, it is not palatable to the means it doesn't give taste to the water. So it is like tasteless. The water is tasteless. So it is good to maintain the TDS levels of less than 600 milligrams per liter. Okay, and also through this cartridge, that is reverse osmosis cartridge, it also removes the hardness and also removes the heavy metals and any disease causing bacteria or viruses or protozoa cysts. So it is able to remove all the microorganisms like bacteria, viruses and its spores and cysts and everything. So this is very important. So this is the process of multi-stage reverse osmosis. So that's about purification of water at household level. So next, coming to the another purification of water, another method of purification of water at small scale, that is disinfection of wells. So usually this is wells are the most commonly used sources of water in rural areas. So it is important to disinfect the wells as well. So these are the main sources of water supply in rural areas. So there are certain conditions where the disinfection of wells has to be required. Examples like any epidemics that happens like cholera, gastroenteritis and all. So there is a need to disinfect the wells. So the most effective method of disinfection of wells is by process called as by using bleaching powder. So that's nothing but chlorination. So that is the cheapest and most effective method of disinfection of wells. So let's see how it actually has to do. So what are the various steps for disinfecting the well? So the first thing is, before disinfecting the well, we should know how much water the well has. Okay, so for that we have to find out the volume of water that is present in the well. Okay, so how do you get the volume? It is by knowing the depth and the diameter of the well. So depth of water that is present in the well and what is the diameter of the well. By knowing these two parameters, if you use the formula, that is pi d square h by 4 into 1000. Pi means 3.14. So into d square. D square is, that is the diameter. D is the diameter of the well, and H is the depth of the water column that is present in the well, and divided by 4 into 1000. So this gives the idea of how much water that is present in the well. So you should know the depth of the water present in the well and what is the diameter of the well. When you multiply those parameters, and you will get the volume in pi d square H by 4 into 1000 formula. So next thing is, we know how much water is present in the well. We calculated the volume of water present in the well. Now we should find out what is actual amount of bleaching powder that is required for that particular water that is present in the well. It is nothing but the chlorine demand of the water that is present in the well. So this we can identify by using a equipment that's called as Horrocks apparatus. This is very, very important. Horrocks apparatus we use to identify the chlorine demand of water. That means amount of bleaching powder, the dose of bleaching powder that is required to disinfect that particular water. So usually it differs. Okay, some waters will get highly contaminated, some waters will be less contaminated. That's why first we should able to identify what is the actual required amount of bleaching powder to that particular type of water that is present in the well. Okay, let's see how do you calculate this thing, dose of bleaching powder. So this Horrocks apparatus that contains these are, you can see in the picture, these are the equipments it has. One is, it has a black cup. You can see in the picture left side. One is a black cup that is of 200 ml with a marking at the on the top that is not seen properly. Next, it has 6 white cups which is of 200 ml in this thing, and then 7 glass stirring rods. So we use separate stirring rods for each cup. Okay, that's why there are 7 glass stirring rods, and it has 1 pipette. It has 2 droppers, and it has starch iodide indicator solution, and then bleaching powder, 2 metal spoons which can hold 2 grams of bleaching powder in each, and the plastic or wooden box containing all these items to keep. So these are the various things a Horrocks apparatus which contains. So you can see it is there in our museum also. So when you come here, you can see this. This is mainly used to identify the amount of bleaching powder that is required to that particular water. That's nothing but to identify the chlorine demand of water. So what are the steps in this? So how do you identify? So first is, you have to prepare the stock solution. So stock solution is nothing but, you have to take 1 level spoonful of bleaching powder that is equal to 2 grams in that black cup. You have seen the black cup, no? So in that you have to take 2 grams of bleaching powder and add water up to the mark. Okay. After that, we have white cups, right? 6 white cups. So in those 6 white cups, you just have to fill the water. So whichever water you are going to test it. Okay, and by using a special pipette that is provided, okay, you have to add in first cup 1 drop of stock solution, in the second cup 2 drops of stock solution, in third cup 3 drops. Like that you have to add. We have 6 cups, right? So like that, 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, like that you keep on adding that stock solution, and then stir it by using separate rods. So after this, you have to add 3 drops of starch iodine indicator. Okay, that gives the color. Okay, to each white cup. So development of blue color indicates that presence of free residual chlorine. So it means that if wherever you identify the what you call blue color in any cup, that means that much of bleaching powder is required. It means if you seeing blue color, means it's nothing but there is an indication of availability of free residual chlorine. When this free residual chlorine happens, it happens when the water meets the chlorine demand, right? After meeting the chlorine demand only, you can see the free residual chlorine. So to identify this free residual chlorine, we add the starch iodine indicator. So if you add the starch iodine indicator, it forms the blue color. Okay. So in whichever cup you find out this blue color means that much amount of bleaching powder is required. Simply, if the first cup shows blue color, it means that 2 grams of bleaching powder is required to disinfect 455 liters of water. Whereas, suppose if you identify the blue color in third cup, where you have used 3 drops, right? So third cup. So then you should multiply 2 grams with 3. So it is nothing but 6 grams. So that means 6 grams of bleaching powder is required to disinfect 455 liters of water. That's how you can identify what is the dose of bleaching powder that is required to disinfect that particular waters. Okay, suppose if you identify blue color in second cup, that means you multiply with the 2 grams with 2, that is 4 grams of bleaching powder that is required to disinfect 455 liters of water, right? So that's about the process. So that's about Horrocks apparatus. That's about how to find out the amount of bleaching powder required. Okay. The next third step is after identify, we got to know how much bleaching powder is required to disinfect that well. Next step is that bleaching powder has to be dissolved in the well. So it is just, you cannot just throw the bleaching powder whatever you identify the required amount. So there is a process for mixing that bleaching powder into the well. So what is that process? First, what you have to do is you have to take a bucket that maximum of 100 grams of bleaching powder can be fit into that bucket. Okay, so you have to add 100 grams of bleaching powder to the bucket and then add water into the bucket. So, and then allow it to sediment for 5 to 10 minutes. So after that, what happens? Some of the lime that is present in the bleaching powder that gets settles down at the bottom. So, and then whatever water that is formed superficially, that's called as supernatant solution, that has to be separated. Okay, that you can transfer into another bucket. So whatever supernatant water that you have separated, that water has to be added to the well. So that is the fourth step. So delivery of chlorine solution into the well. So by same thing. So you have to deliver that supernatant water that which you have transferred into the another bucket. So that you slowly put it into the well, like lower it down into the water or to some distance in below the water. After that, you have to shake it. Okay, vigorously you have to shake it. That's how you have to deliver the bleaching powder into the well. After delivering, the bucket should be in contact. The chlorine bleaching solution should be kept in water for contact period of 1 hour. Okay, so that's the way you have to disinfect the well. So to identify whether again to recheck, we have find out through Horrocks apparatus how much bleaching powder is required, but to recheck whether the chlorine demand was met or not by using a test called orthotolidine arsenate test to identify the presence of free residual chlorine in the water. So it should be at least 0.5 milligrams per liter. So that is the process of well disinfection. Okay. So next we'll move on to water quality standards. So what are these water quality standards? So water quality standards are nothing but once the purification has taken place, but to check whether the water quality is maintained or not, to judge the quality of water, we have to follow certain standards. Okay, the main purpose of these water quality standards are to minimize all the known health hazards that are occurred due to contamination of water. Right. So let's see what are the standards we have to check. So according to WHO, there are certain guidelines you have to follow for drinking water to identify the quality of drinking water. So those are like acceptability aspects, microbiological aspects, chemical aspects, and radiological aspects. So all these things has to be checked to identify whether the water is the quality of the water is maintained or not. The standards have been maintained or not. So the acceptability aspects, microbiological aspects, chemical aspects, and radiological aspects. So what is meant by acceptability aspects? So acceptability aspects means which has physical parameters. That means like appearance. So how the water appears. So in that we have turbidity, color, taste, and odor and temperature. So the physical, these are the physical parameter. Turbidity. So turbidity is mainly because of the particulate matter that is present in the water. Because of that, the water gets turbid. So if the water gets turbid, obviously it is not acceptable by the people. So always you have to maintain the turbidity levels of less than 5 NTUs. So that is the maximum allowable values. Next is the color. So color usually to the water is mainly because of the irons and manganese that is present in the earth. Okay. Next, that has to be less than 15 TCU. That is true color units. Next is the taste and odor. So usually to the water, if there is any presence of chemicals or any biological sources or any byproducts like through chlorination, such things can leads to there will be change in the taste and odor to the water, especially byproduct of water treatment means chlorination. If you do chlorination through bleaching powder, obviously it gives some particular type of odor. So all these things are matters. Okay. Next is the temperature. Always the cool waters are more palatable than the hot waters. Okay. So these are the physical parameters. Next is inorganic constituents and their acceptability aspects. So here we have chlorides. Chlorides we usually retains into the water because of the through rains. Okay, the level should be less than 200 to 600 milligrams per liter. And then ammonia. If any ammonia, that is mainly because of the contamination of any sewage or animal waste products into the water. That so water gets polluted because of the presence of ammonia. There will be a bad taste and odor to the water. So that aspects also be taken care of. Next is hydrogen sulfide. So if any hydrogen sulfide is present, then it gives a very bad smell. That means rotten egg smell. It creates the odor. Next is the total dissolved solids. So as I told you, TDS is very important to maintain the taste of the water. If the TDS is above 600 milligrams, it's the water obviously it is not palatable. So you cannot able to drink the water. If it is above 1000, it is highly impossible to drink the water. So next is the hardness. So hardness, all of you know, if the hardness is above 200 milligram per liter, it can cause scale deposition, and if it is below 100 milligrams per liter, it causes corrosion to the water pipes. So it is always important to maintain the hardness between 100 to 200 milligrams per liter. So some amount of hardness should be there to the water, because if if you remove the hardness completely, it can cause corrosion to the water pipes. So it should be the normal ranges between 100 to 200 milligrams per liter. Next is the pH. pH is also very important for the water. If the pH, the normal pH of the water is between 7 to 8. So if the pH is less than 7, it can cause severe corrosion, and it all that causes the means where the water is getting supplied. So those pipes gets can lead to corrosion. And then if it is more than 8, so it decreases the efficacy of disinfection. So as I told you, if you remember during chlorination process, it when you calculating the chlorine demand, so particular pH and temperature has to be maintained to the water. That means the pH should be between 7 to 8. If it is above 8, then it is the disinfection process doesn't take place effectively. So the pH is also important. So these are the acceptability aspects. Next is the microbiological aspects. So microbiological as indicators are very important to identify if any pollution that has happened because of any contamination with the excreta. So to identify that, we use this microbiological indicators. So examples here we consider are coliform organisms, fecal streptococci, and Clostridium perfringens. Any of these organisms, if it is present in the water, it indicates the water got polluted with excreta. So these are the important biological, microbiological, that means bacteriological indicators. So in microbiological indicators, we have bacteriological indicators, viral, and then protozoal. So first is bacteriological indicators. So in bacteriological indicators, we choose coliform organisms, fecal streptococcal, and Clostridium perfringens. These are the three organisms we have chosen. We'll tell you why these organisms has been chosen for as an indicators, if any, bacteriological collision that has taken place. So primarily these coliform organisms, these are the primary bacterial indicators. So it has two types. One is fecal group, another one is non-fecal group. Fecal group means E. coli and non-fecal group is Klebsiella. So why these coliform organisms has been taken as an indicator? Because it is constantly present in the human gut at very high amount, that is at great abundance. Next, it is easily detected by culture methods and it survives longer than any other pathogens, and also it has great resistance to forces of any natural purification. So because of these important properties it has, this has been chosen as the primary bacterial indicator for any bacteriological contamination of water. So next is fecal streptococcal organisms. So if presence of any of these fecal streptococci in the water, it indicates any recent fecal pollution to the water. Whereas Clostridium perfringens, where the spores are very much resistant for any purification process, if presence of these spores, Clostridium perfringens spores in the water, it indicates that the contamination has occurred at very long time back, so remote time. So these are the various indicators, bacteriological indicators we use. So next is the biological. So those are like most commonly through water we can see these hepatitis A, which gets transmitted. So these we can easily the viruses which we can disinfect through chlorination process and also the ozone we can use. Next are the biological aspects. So usually what are the parasites which are present commonly in water are protozoa. Examples are Entamoeba, Histolytica, Giardia, Balanterium coli. Then helminths like parasitic roundworms, flatworms, dracunculus, and the cystotomes. Then free living organisms like fungi, algae, all these things you have to consider on the biological aspects. So that's about that thing. Next is chemical aspects. Okay, so chemical aspects, we have organic constituents, then we have inorganic constituents and organic constituents. So inorganic constituents, examples, chemicals like arsenic. So arsenic usually, so here we have different constituents from where we get these constituents, and then what is the maximum permissible level in the water. Okay, so that's given here. So arsenic is usually produced in available from the minerals and ores in the earth. Maximum permissible level is 0.01. Next is cadmium. This cadmium is produced mainly from steel industries and batteries. Okay. Next is present in the water, it can cause dental and skeletal fluorosis. And if it is present lesser amount, then it causes dental caries. So the maximum allowable is 1.5 milligrams per liter. If it is more than that, then it causes dental and skeletal fluorosis. Next is lead. So this lead is mainly because of plumbing in the pipes that is present. So it can cause calcium metabolism. Okay, next is mercury. So mercury also affects the central nervous system. Then nitrates and nitrites. So that can cause methemoglobinemia, globinemia, if it is present more than 50 milligrams per liter of nitrates and 3 milligrams per liter of nitrates. Next is selenium. Selenium is very important to maintain the growth of hair and all. So it helps in formation of glutathione peroxidase. enzyme. So maximum acceptable level is 0.01. So these are the chemical aspects. And then we have organic constituents under chemical aspects. Those are like polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, then some pesticides. So as all of you know, these are mainly because of industrialization. There are a lot of pesticides and all these things are polluting our waters. So these are the various limits, upper limits that is accepted in the water, like benzene, toluene, xylenes, and then DDT, aldrins, 2,4-D, linden, hexafluorobenzene. So all these are the different chemical agents. So next is radiological aspects. So radiological aspect is also very important. If the water gets exposed to any radiation, so that aspect also has to be considered because that also affects humans. Okay, suppose if the radiological effect that occurs in the humans who got exposed to that, so those effects are called as somatic effects. But when this after getting affected with radiological this thing radiation, if the what you call effect that occurs in next generation, not to the people directly who got exposed to radiation, so those that is called as hereditary effect. Somatic means those who directly exposed to the cause, whereas hereditary means the effects which we see in the next generation. That is the main difference between somatic and hereditary effect. Okay, that's about radiological aspects. So next is the another important thing, that is surveillance of drinking water quality. So what is the surveillance of drinking water quality means? Suppose the water got purified and people are getting the purified water. That purified water is getting supplied, but to know whether whether the quality is maintaining properly or not, to check that we use this surveillance. Surveillance is nothing but monitoring the process, whether the pure water is getting supplied or not. So main purpose of the surveillance is to check the quality control and protect the water from any waterborne diseases. That is the main purpose of surveillance. So what are the steps we use in this process? One is sanitary survey. That is nothing but on-spot inspection of water. Next is the sampling method. So in sampling method, we use some certain standards, like we follow WHO guidelines, we follow ICMR standards to check the quality of water, quality for drinking water supplies. And then we also check bacteriological surveillance. We use prism to coliform test, and then we check biological examination, like to check if any presence of any parasites or protozoas, fungi, algae, any hookworms, and all, which we already discussed. And then chemical surveillance. So chemical surveillance, we check if any pesticides are present. That's because of any agriculture or industrialization. So these aspects are considered under surveillance. So that's about surveillance. Next is the hardness of water. So all of you must be knowing about this little bit, the hardness of water. So what is hardness of water? It means it's simply defined as the soap destroying power of the water. It's nothing but large amounts of soap that is required to produce the lather. So that's called as hardness of water. So why this hardness occurs to the water? It's mainly because of calcium bicarbonate, magnesium bicarbonates, calcium sulfates, and magnesium sulfates. Usually the bicarbonates causes temporary hardness, whereas the sulfates causes permanent hardness. I think all of you know this. So next, coming to what are the disadvantages of hardness. So usually what happens if any hardness is there to the water, it consumes lot of soap, and because of hardness, it also causes scaling of boilers, because boilers are getting heated up, so it forms a scales deposition, and then it adversely affects the cooking. For the fabrics, when you wash in hard water, it destroys the life of the fabrics, and hardness also shortens the life of the pipes and fixtures because it forms the scales inside the pipes. So these are the disadvantages of hardness. Okay, so drinking water should be moderately hard. It shouldn't be completely without hardness. It should has minimum hardness, so it should be moderately hard, because if it is 100% soft, then it can cause corrosiveness to the water. So little bit of hardness, moderate hardness has to be accepted. Next, when should we do a softening of water? When, if you find out the hardness, what is the acceptable level? So if the hardness exceeds 3 milliequivalents per liter, then the water requires softness process. So that's about hardness. So next, coming to what are the types and treatments of hardness. So as I told, there are two types of hardness: temporary hardness and permanent hardness. So temporary hardness is caused because of bicarbonates, and permanent hardness is because of sulfates. So we have different process methods for removal of these hardness. For removal of temporary hardness, we can use boiling, we can use addition of lime, we can use addition of sodium carbonate, and base exchange process. So these are the various methods we use to remove the temporary hardness. Next is the permanent hardness. So by addition of sodium carbonate and base exchange process. These are the two commonly used methods to remove the permanent hardness. So last two methods, like addition of sodium carbonate and base exchange process. These two methods we can use for both temporary hardness and permanent hardness. So let's see what are these. So through boiling, the first is removal of temporary hardness. That's mainly by boiling, addition of lime, so on. So boiling is removal of temporary hardness. It is just simply boil the water. What happens if you boil the hard water? It liberates the carbon dioxide, okay, and it forms insoluble carbonates. Okay, that's about boiling. Next is addition of lime. So addition of lime is nothing but calcium hydroxide. So when you add calcium hydroxide to the hard water, it forms calcium carbonate, that is insoluble material. Okay, so this method is also called as Clark's method. Addition of lime is also called as Clark's method. In this method, we use calcium hydroxide. Okay, so this calcium bicarbonates, when it reacts with calcium hydroxide, and it forms insoluble calcium carbonates. Okay, so that's about addition of lime. Next is coming to the removal of permanent hardness. So in permanent hardness, so in temporary hardness, we also use sodium carbonate and also base exchange process, both. But here I'm discussing because the method is same. So first is addition of sodium carbonate. So sodium carbonate is also called as washing soda. So just simply by adding sodium carbonate, or also called as washing soda, to the hard water. So it means sodium carbonate, when it combines with calcium chloride, it forms calcium carbonate. That is the insoluble material. Okay, so that is the method of adding sodium carbonate. Whereas in base exchange process, it's also called as permutate. Permutate process, here what happens is, if you see this picture, so it has a zeolite. Okay, so this zeolite contains sodium. So this sodium, it gets replaced with calcium and magnesium after the process. So that's called as base exchange process. So whatever calcium and magnesium that is present in the hard water, that gets exchanged with the sodium. Okay, so that's called as base exchange process. You can see here, this is called zeolite bed. So it contains sodium. So the sodium gets exchanged with magnesium and calcium that is present in hard water. So this process is called as base exchange process, also called as permutate. So this is another method of removal of permanent hardness. Okay, next thing is swimming pool sanitation. So it is important for any swimming pool that has to get sanitized, because many people use the swimming pools. Okay, so why these swimming pools has to be sanitized? It is mainly because the water is exposed to fecal contamination or organisms that has come out from the skin and nasopharynx of the people who uses the swimming pool. So because of that, there are various health hazards. like the fungal and viral infections that can occur because of the, if any infections that are present in the skin that get transmitted to other person, and any infections of eye, ear, nose and throats also get infected. Then infections of the upper respiratory tract, then intestinal infections, and some kind of accidents that also can happens in the swimming pool. So these are the various health hazards of swimming pool. So next, how to sanitize the swimming pool, we'll see. So first is the recommended area. So there are certain standards has to be followed while constructing the swimming pool. So it is a recommended area per person is 24 square feet. At least 24 square feet of recommended area is required per person. Okay, so in that way, how many persons are entering into the swimming pool? The area, the swimming pool has to be constructed in that way. Okay, that is the recommended area. Next is surveillance. Surveillance means always you have to keep monitoring various aspects like biological, viral, as we already discussed. Okay, microbiological aspects, viral, all those things. Next is the filtration of water. So always remember, along with the swimming pool, there will be always the presence of what you call filters nearby swimming pool. Okay, to remove the disinfect. Always to filter the water for disinfection process. Next is chlorination. So here in filtration of water we use rapid sand filters examples. And next is the chlorination. So chlorination is very important. So that's how you can disinfect the swimming pools. Here another important the process is same like what I have discussed previously. The chlorination, like you have to identify the as you remember I have discussed in disinfection of wells. Okay, same way you have to identify the how much bleaching powder is required to disinfect the swimming pools. For that you have to identify the chlorine demand of water, all those things, it's the same. Okay, but thing is the residual effect. Usually 0.5 milligrams per liter is required, the chlorine, but in for swimming pools we consider it is 1 milligram per liter for residual effect. So that's the only difference. Okay, next is microbiological, bacteriological quality. So these are the measures. So next is the water conservation. So this is the last thing in last topic in water. So water conservation, I think all of you know what is water conservation. So it is very much important these days because of urbanization and there is a decreased rainfall. It's all obviously there is a decreased rainfall, that is mainly because of urbanization, industrialization, what's happening these days. So there is a large scarcity of water, right? So it is very important for us to conserve the water that is present in the ground. So that groundwater conservation is very important at this moment. Okay. So how can we do this water conservation? Mainly by two methods we can conserve the water. One is by preservation of wastage and second one is water harvesting. First is you have to prevent the wastage of water, and then second process is by water harvesting. So first is how do you make people to realize to use less water. That is how you make people to realize not to waste the water. It is only by creating the awareness, by creating awareness in the people to use less water and less wastage, especially for the domestic purpose or like in the kitchen and toilets and wherever we are using. Okay, so we should make people aware the importance of water. Okay, and what are the methods, simple methods they have to what you call habituate to uh, prevent the wastage of water. So that is first thing, by creating awareness of preventing the wastage of water. And second thing is water harvesting. So this water harvesting, I think since recent years, many people are following this. Okay, so water harvesting is mainly done by creating soakage pits or by constructing the trenches. So what is this water harvesting? Usually what happens when the rains comes, whatever water that gets accumulated on the rooftops of the buildings, that gets drained into into normal drains like wastewater drains. Instead of that, we redirecting that water which are getting drained unnecessarily into waste drains like sewage and all those things. Instead of that, we can redirect that water into soakage pits or trenches, okay, through some PVC pipes. In that way, you can redirect into soakage pits or trenches, which easily make available of that water into the, which gets easily percolate into the ground. So for that, constructing these soakage pits or trenches, we have to follow certain guidelines. So here, if you see this picture, so the water, whatever is forming on the rooftops, that gets collected through the PVC pipes, that gets enters into this. So this is the soakage pit. Okay. So these are the soakage pit or trenches. Okay. So from this, again, we connect it to tube wells. Usually in urban areas, we all draw water from tube wells. Tube wells are nothing but bores. Okay. So from this trench or soakage pit, the water enters into tube wells through pipes. So this is the process of water conservation. Here, there are certain guidelines we follow for construction of these trenches or soakage pit. Usually, you have to dig it up to 5 meters depth, and then in that first you have to put big stones. After that, on top of the stones, we have to cover it up with sand and gravel. Okay, and then cover it with normal soil. So once the rainwater comes into that, it gets filtered through this gravel and sand, and then from the big stones which are present below that, and then the water gets purified and it enters into tube well. From tube well, we utilize that water. So this is actual method of water conservation. So that's nothing but water harvesting. So that's how you can conserve the water. So with that, I have completed water. So next class we'll move to air and air pollution. Okay. Thank you.